Okay, sure. All right, go for it.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us again on our daily crypto lockdown, where we chat about to people all around the world of what's happening in their cities and towns and countries with regards to COVID-19 and the lockdown. And then we normally jump into the markets, the crypto market, and talk to the TrendSig guys, the TAs there, of what we can expect happening. And from time to time, we've got speakers, special guest speakers like Dawie Roodt today, South Africa's top economist, chief economist at the Efficient Group, who's going to talk to us about a little bit about the South African economy, what we can expect, and what's happening on globally. And then hopefully we can talk to Dawie a bit about crypto. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining us. And Dawie, again, I really appreciate your time and effort to join us. And the floor is now all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And again, my apologies. We had sometimes there are some challenges and we have to work around those. All right. So the question here is that to just have a bit of a look at what's going on with the world economy, what can be expected in terms of the South African economy, and then, if I understand the brief correctly, you want me to talk particularly about what about money, and more specifically about so-called cryptocurrencies or private monies.
That will be very nice if you can. Yeah.
All right. So let's start off internationally. And see where the world economy finds itself at the moment, and maybe have a look at the South African economy. I'm going to jump over those. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I don't know if we are going to take questions in between or going to wait until the end, but I do know that I have some time set aside for this until I see 15:30. So we've got more than an hour. So I don't know if you're going to stop me with questions in between.
I think.
Happy with that?
Yeah, I think if you can carry on talking, people can maybe just raise their hands if they've got questions, and then we handle the questions afterwards for a better flow.
Okay, but you will handle all of that. I will just stop me if you think I'm just bubbling on too much. All right.
Thanks.
So let's have a look at the international economy. Just a few things that I want to point out about the international economy. Let's get off with politics. Is that what we've seen in the recent years is a new kind of nationalism. Let's call it new nationalism. And you can see it in Europe. I think Brexit is a very good example of that. Now, this is different from what we see 100 years prior to, well, the couple of decades prior to the last decade, is that the last couple of decades we've seen more integration in terms of the global economy and also more political integration. But especially in the past couple of years, we saw the opposite, a new kind of nationalism happening. Brexit is a good example. There are many other examples in Europe. I think there are many examples in Europe, like in Catalonia, Eastern Europe, generally speaking, and so on. There are many countries, I mean, Poland and Hungary and Austria. Those are all countries where you can see elements of new nationalism. Now, that is interesting because, and of course, the best example of all of those is certainly Donald Trump with America First. That's an excellent example of new nationalism. These sort of things usually lead to politicians trying to isolate their economies, leading to things like what we call, for example, today, trade wars and stuff like that. And that, without a doubt, was a significant potential threat to the world economy. But quite ironically, that is exactly what the virus did. The virus closed off all these economies, and all of a sudden we are experiencing a trade war of sorts in the form of economies being sort of prevented from trading for one another. And that's exactly what the trade war would have been like. So hopefully the politicians will learn a very important lesson here, is that trade wars are not good because that undermines world economy. So I think I've got a suspicion that with this lesson that we're learning because of the virus, that the trade wars in future is going to be less, one thing less to be worrying to worry about. Having said that, obviously there are a couple of other potential conflicts that we have to keep an eye on. I think what is happening in China, particularly the Chinese, that was without a doubt an economic miracle, what's been happening there the past 20, 30 years in China. And they are knocking on the door of the Americans, trying to push the Americans off their pedestal as the biggest economy in the world, and of course all the consequences and the responsibilities that goes with that as well, including things like military issues and so on. So, and that and the Americans is certainly not going to take that lying down, and we can see already all sort of, at least the rumors. I mean, the recent rumor is that the Chinese actually started this virus. I think that is an example of the kind of silly things that one will hear because of essentially a conflict between the two major powers left in the world. And of course, a number of other conflicts that are currently playing out in the Middle East, I think is something that's always been going on. But all those sort of things we need to keep an eye on. So that's politics internationally, but new nationalism in a way is still there, although I believe less pronounced than before Corona. Let's call it BC, before Corona. But a couple of, that's politics. So a couple of other things internationally that I think is worth mentioning is that two things particularly. One is that debt levels internationally is currently at the highest it has ever been. And it's important because now all of a sudden, now that the tide is going out, as Warren Buffett says, if the tide is going out, you can see who's been swimming naked, and now we can see who's been swimming naked because the tide has been going out with the virus, and now we can see who's in trouble. Now, there are two groups of institutions that are in trouble because of the exceptionally high levels of debt. The one, of course, is governments or states, and we have worldwide, we have government debt levels at record high levels today. And if it has not been for central banks that support their governments worldwide simply would not have been in a position to do what they are currently doing. And that brings me to another important point, and that is interest rates internationally and monetary policy that is currently exceptionally accommodative. It was even so before BC, before the virus. Now, essentially what it means is that governments today owe a lot of money because they've completely overspent the last couple of years. It's not on capital, but on current expenditure, and also in an attempt to support their financial markets, especially after the financial crisis of 2008. And central banks have been creating money out of thin air, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later, out of been creating So I just had an interruption. Can you still hear me fine? Is it still fine?
Yeah, it's back now. Thanks, Dawie.
Okay, cool. So my apologies. So central banks have been creating a lot of money, printing a lot of money, and that money has been used to bring interest rates down, and that has put governments in a position where they can borrow a lot of money. So that is where we are now. So that's the virus, and all of a sudden financial markets are under pressure again. Governments need to use their fiscal accounts, that's the state accounts, to support the economies, but they are completely and totally over-indebted already, and that's where central banks are coming in very, very handy. And central banks essentially are printing money. I'm talking about the big central banks internationally, the Fed and America and Europeans and even the Chinese and the Japanese. They are printing money like there is no tomorrow, and that means that the money supply, the so-called high-powered money, is being increased at an alarming rate. Now, I as a libertarian, or a bit of an anarchist, I guess I can call myself, would immediately predict that if you create a lot of money out of nothing, it will lead to inflation. Now, we have not seen that yet. And the reason for that is simply because the credit creation process hasn't taken off yet. But I'll talk about that a little bit later when I talk about money. So those are two international factors that we have to be aware of. Exceptionally high debt levels for governments especially, and very, very low interest rates coming from central banks with their particular approach to monetary policy. Maybe just a last comment about what's going on internationally. It's not only governments and states that owe a lot of money, it is also certain kinds of companies. Now I say certain kinds of companies because unlike the previous financial crisis in 2008, when banks were in very deep trouble, this time around, it's not banks that are in trouble. Of course, banks will eventually also get in trouble when their customers fall over. But it is especially what we're seeing currently is that it's the other kinds of companies that are getting into trouble. Like, for example, manufacturing companies, also companies in the primary industries. In the case of America, it's a good example is the so-called oil frackers that owe a lot of money. So companies owe a lot of money, and also don't make a mistake. A lot of money is being owned by companies in China, including government-owned companies in China. We don't exactly know how much that is, but that is a major issue internationally. So that is the international environment. Maybe one or two comments in terms of expected, in terms of economic growth. Economic growth internationally for the world economy is going to be negative. So the world economy is going to go through a recession, depending who you ask. My suspicion is we can talk about a global contraction of 2 or 3%. Just about all the major economies are or will go through a recession. The Chinese already reported negative economic growth for the first quarter. The Europeans are mostly in a recession, most of the European economies, some deeper, some less so. The British economy is an interesting one because their experiments in monetary policy is really quite extreme. They are literally printing money or creating money out of nothing and giving it directly to their politicians to spend. They don't even pretend to go via something else, like in the case of the Americans, and in fact, in the case of South Africa as well. They simply print money and give it to their politicians to spend. Now, there's a name for it. We could talk about that as well. It's called modern monetary economics, or modern monetary policy, and that simply means central banks printing money literally and giving it to their politicians. It's quite an interesting policy, but of course, people with my persuasion, they will be horrified by an approach like this because it will eventually lead to inflation. But again, a little bit later, more about that. So the European economy is in a recession mostly. The American economy also certainly, without a doubt, will go through a recession, and a fairly deep recession as well. The Chinese economy for the year, at the moment, I think they're probably going to come in around about 0, maybe 1% growth for the year in total. But this is the slowest rate of economic growth in China, probably since the early 1970s. And the same goes for the Japanese. The economy will be contracting as well. And most other economies like Eastern European economies, and I really favor and I really do like the Eastern European economies, and Russia, of course, as well. And a very good reason for the Russian economy going through a recession, not only because of the virus, but also because of the recent sharp decline in the oil price. On the slightly longer term view, if there's one of the economies that I really fancy internationally, the economy that I believe is going to be the next growth engine for the world economy, is certainly India. I like India. If Narendra Modi, another new nationalist, by the way, if he can get his political act together, then the Indian economy is certainly one of those economies that can really experience spectacular economic growth. But all in all, at the moment, the world is in a very, very bad place. Many people are going to lose their jobs, and many people are going to get much, much poorer. So that's where the world economy is at the moment. The South African economy, one or two comments about politics, first of all. Well, let me make this comment. The ANC government and the tripartite alliance has been the most destructive force that the South African economy has ever experienced. We have never seen so much damage done to the South African economy, especially in the past 10 years. It happened before that as well. But we've seen incredible damage done to the South African economy. And there are so many examples of that. Now, why is that? I think there could be a number of reasons, but there's something that I realized only relatively recently, and that is that many economists and analysts ascribe the acts or the policies of the ruling alliance in terms of our perception of their ideology. Put differently, an economist, when you analyze policies, you will look at a specific government and you would try to understand where their ideological sympathies lie. And then in terms of that, you will look at their policy. So, for example, if there's a communist party, one would expect them to start nationalizing stuff. So that's a simple example. Looking at the South African, the ANC and the tripartite alliance, were consisting of the Communist Party and CASA and the ANC, of course, which are all either very far left-wing, like the Communist Party, or sort of socialist, or a kind of liberation kind of organization, which the ANC recently has become again. The point is, we've got to do here with a left-leaning, ideologically speaking, group of organizations in charge of South Africa. I think that was the approach that we economists took. We made a big mistake. That may have been the case. It may have been the case some time ago for the government to implement certain policies because of their ideological beliefs. Today, that certainly is not the case anymore. The ANC and the ANC alliance today exists for one reason and for one reason only, and that is to live off the state. So let me repeat that. The ANC and the ANC alliance, and of course there are always exceptions, but they exist for one reason only, nothing to do with ideology. They exist for one reason, and that is to live off the state. That means that it's impossible for the state to cut back on state spending in any important manner, because that means that you will undermine the reason for the existence for the tripartite alliance. They simply will not allow that. And that makes it extremely difficult for the Minister of Finance, as an example, to cut back on the wage bill, because the wage bill feeds the members of COSATU, which is part of the tripartite alliance. And that's also part of the reason why they cannot liquidate or get rid of South African Airways, as an example, because that's the reason why we have South African Airways. Not because we want an airline, we want South African Airways because that's the way for the members of the tripartite, or many of them, to live off. It's a means for them to live off. It's a means for them of getting money in their pockets, essentially. So that means that we are dealing with an animal here that's not, it should not be defined in terms of ideology. It must be defined in terms of something else. It is essentially a parasitic organization that lives off the state. Now, I did mention that the state, the ANC and alliance did immense damage to the South African economy in the recent years. And let me give you some examples. I think Eskom is a good example. Eskom has been run into the ground financially and operationally. Eskom today is outstanding debt of Eskom is around about 500 billion. It is that's rands. It is nearly impossible for Eskom it is impossible for Eskom with its current inflows or revenue to service this kind of debt. It's just not possible. The annual debt is around about 80 billion rand annually. It's not possible given the current revenue to service that kind of debt. There are approximately 20,000 people, too many, that are paid by Eskom. They are called employees, but they are simply there because they don't really contribute that much. On average, they are much better remunerated than the private sector. And this is not against, I'm not pointing fingers to the individuals. I think they are actually the victims in many instances. In the case of South African Airways, there are many, many victims. But the point is that there are just too many people being paid by Eskom. I can't see how Eskom can be turned around. It's nearly impossible. And remember, Eskom, all that debt, or most of that debt, is basically guaranteed by the taxpayer. The same goes for South African Airways. And if you can see the pattern that South African Airways has followed the last 10 years or so, very interesting. I mean, the thing just kept on losing money. They kept on transferring billions and tens of billions of rand to South African Airways. Analysts keep on telling them, stop the bleeding, stop the bleeding. They kept on doing that recently, and it's mostly because of Pravin Gordhan. He was mostly in charge of that. Of course, it's not all only his fault, but he was there all the time. He was Minister of Finance, force-feeding these parasitals, Eskom and South African Airways and PRASA and all those. While he was the Minister of Finance, today he's responsible for state-owned enterprises, and still he does not allow them to die. He just keeps trying his utmost best, interfering politically on the management levels at South African Airways and Eskom and all of those, preventing the management of making the necessary adjustment to let those institutions die. And eventually, South African Airways was put into business rescue, so-called voluntary, which of course is a lot of bullshit. That's not the case. South African Airways was put into business rescue because of one of the other trade unions applying for business rescue because the thing is completely bankrupt. And Pravin Gordhan did not have a choice but to go along. And he's trying to save face by saying if you put South African Airways into voluntary business rescue. South African Airways recently applied for another 10 billion rand. And if this was 2 months ago, they probably would have gotten it. But the reality is that the fiscal accounts are, the coffins are completely bare, and there's no way they can give South African Airways another 10 billion rand. And anyway, I believe everybody will I mean, there will be a huge uproar if they give more money to that institution. So that's where we are with South Africa anyway. So I think the point I'm trying to make, they keep on following the wrong policies. Things keep on going wrong, but they simply do not change track. They keep on doing that, and even after the thing has died, and the carcass has started rotting, and everybody can smell it, they keep on trying to keep this thing alive. South African Airways is one of those examples. And the reason, it's very easy to understand, because the longer they keep this thing alive, the longer more people can live of it. Because the ANC and the Alliance is there primarily to live off the state. Looking at the state accounts, the fiscal accounts in South Africa, it is a complete mess. It was a complete mess before Corona. State debt levels, even before Corona, was at completely unsustainable levels. The fiscal deficit completely unsustainable and all of that. And that also happened primarily while President Gordon was the Minister of Finance. Then the virus hit us, and I'm afraid everything has gotten from bad to really bad. That's where we are. The fiscal accounts simply are not strong enough to support a huge support package to the South African economy. Unlike many other countries in the world, they're announcing 10-20% of GDP support for the economy. We can't do that because we just don't have the capacity on the fiscal accounts. And after this virus, somehow the debt will be much, much higher because state revenue is under tremendous pressure, and even more so now with an economy collapsing. So the fiscal account is a mess. And that's part of the reason why we saw a downgrade from Moody's and everything that goes with that. There is a very important silver lining, and that's the monetary authorities, the South African Reserve Bank, has managed the monetary side of the economy quite conservatively for many years, and they've been taking a lot of flack doing that. Many analysts arguing that they should have lowered the interest rates much sooner. Fortunately, they did not, and that means now that we actually need some stimulus and some support from the Reserve Bank, we can actually afford it to do that because of the way they've managed it previously. So well done to Lesetja Kanyako doing an excellent job. And the Reserve Bank recently did a couple of things. And they, for example, they've lowered interest rates. They've changed some of the liquid and capital requirements of banks. They even entered this so-called secondary bond market where they're buying government debt instruments. It's a form of quantitative easing and providing liquidity to the financial markets and so on. So I don't have a problem with all of that. I must tell you, it's very dangerous for the Reserve Bank to start buying government bond instruments. I understand they're doing it to provide liquidity to the market, but the real test will be when they have to exit that market. And the Europeans and the Americans and the Japanese, 10 years ago, they started with the same sort of process, and they yet have to exit that market. In fact, they've gone back quite aggressively buying government debt instruments and everything else that moves. But fortunately, the Reserve Bank has been doing a good job. A few numbers on my expectations for the economy this year. Economic contraction around about 8% for this year. Next year, not much better, depending on, anyway, how things work out with the virus, but very weak economic growth in any event. Probably more than 1 million job losses, many thousands of businesses closing down, state revenue under even more pressure. And I've mentioned the fiscal debt accounts and stuff like that. So that's where we find ourselves, the South African economy, and that's not a very nice place to be. I can just make one important comment in that I've done some research and I've tried to calculate. Remember, the biggest single killer in the world is not a virus. It is not malaria. It's not cancer. The single biggest killer in the world is poverty. South Africa's life expectancy is around about I've got it over Australia. South Africa's life expectancy is around about 60 years, just over 60 years, while the Europeans' life expectancy is 80 years, more than 80 years. And they've put the income 3 times that of South Africa. And you can find that wealth correlates with everything that's good and poverty correlates with everything that's bad. And in fact, poverty kills more people than all those other analyses put together. And in fact, we're probably going to see, because of this increase in poverty in South Africa, that over the next 10 years, something like I've calculated, you can ask me how I've done that, but I've calculated approximately 300 or nearly 500,000 people will die because of the increase in poverty. More people is going to die because of the increase in poverty than people are going to die from the coronavirus. There's a question about Australia. Australian economy, they've had an amazing time. the past couple of decades. And the reason why the Australian economy has been doing very, very well is because they simply dug up the Australia and shipped it out to China. That was a commodity boom, and it's because of your next door neighbor, the big guys, and this is Chinese. Now their demand for commodities is without a doubt going to slow down, which will inevitably also have an impact on the Australian economy. And also keep in mind that the Australian economy is also a first world country with a very sophisticated first world component or a tertiary sector, especially the service industry, especially the financial industry. And that is one of those industries that will be affected in the short term by this virus as well. But I also believe that's one of the industries that will get up much quicker. But the Chinese economic growth, I think, is going to be in a much, much lower growth trajectory in the medium term, simply because of commodity prices, and that is because of the slowdown in economic activity in China. So with a bit of luck, India can take over from China, but I don't think that Australians can complain about anything. They've had an amazing run the past 30 years. So, but things are it's not going to look the same over the next couple of years, I guess. I'm not such an expert on the Australian economy. Okay, that's the world economy. I don't know if there are any questions about local or international economy before I get to money, and see if we can talk a little bit about cryptos and so on. But money is actually the topic, and I think it's wrong to talk about cryptos without talking about money and what money means. Can I go on, or should I wait for questions?
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic. You've hit it on the nail. Thanks, Dawie. And on that positive note, we would like to talk about the money. I see there's two hands raised. One question: what's next for government's target? Is it the pension funds? Yeah, so there was a question.
Okay,
Is pension funds the next target?
Okay, let's go through this. The question is pension funds the next target? Now let me go through the pattern. This pattern is a very familiar pattern. We've seen this many places in the world. We're currently seeing it and playing out in many countries in the world. I think Venezuela is a very good example, but this is the pattern. When you get a government that is basically focused on consumption and living off the state, the first thing that they do, they go for the easy targets. They go for things like, for example, taxes, and they start increasing taxes. Exactly what we've seen in South Africa. Of course, they do that under the pretense that you use this tax money for all sort of good things in the economy, but the reality is that's a very nice and a comfortable source of revenue for a government. So that's your first step. Always you start increasing taxes and you start living off taxes. Eventually, taxpayers start to complain, and you have to find an alternative source of revenue, and the alternative source of revenue are to start consuming your existing capital. And in the case of South Africa, Eskom was that. So they started consuming the existing capital, and Eskom was that until you run out of capital. So first you run out of taxpayers, and then you run out of capital. And once you've run out of capital, you still need money, because you've got this organism that lives off the state. And that means inevitably that you have to go for the only remaining pot of gold that is left, and that is the pot of gold of the savers, which means the pension funds. So they're going to go after the pension funds directly or indirectly, all sort of ways of getting to the pension funds. And not only the pension funds, you can also go after the normal savings of individuals by simply implementing things like, for example, foreign exchange controls. If you put in the foreign exchange controls, you prevent people from taking their money out of the country, and that in a way is an indirect tax on savers, on all savers in the country. So the savers will be the next target. In fact, there are many, we all know this. If you read the newspapers, you will know that without a doubt they are targeting the pots of savings of the pension funds, and not only the pension funds. So I believe, yes, that is going to be the next target. And then, of course, once you run out of the savings of other people, to paraphrase Margaret Thatcher, once you've run out of the savings of other people, you still have a big problem, because you need money. And the problem is, by then your debt levels are so high, it's very, very difficult to service your debt levels. So you try to get rid of debt, and you try to get rid of debt by deflating your debt, or give it another name, by creating inflation. Inflation reduces the value of money, and inflation also reduces the value of debt. And that's one way. In fact, in the case of the Brits, 60%, now listen to this number, 60% of all the war debt of Britain was paid off through inflation. Inflation paid off 60% of the war debt of Britain. So that's what they do. So they try to use inflation to pay off debt. And so that's where these sort of parties always end the same. You run out of tax base, you run out of capital, you run out of savings, and then it always ends in inflation. Inflation is a very bad thing. So yes, I'm afraid the question was, is savings going to be next? The answer is yes.
Great, thanks, Dawie. Yeah, that's some scary stuff. Karen, you've got your hand raised. Karen, can you hear me?
Okay, well, I think I've got it. Is that?
There we are.
There she goes.
Okay, hello, Dawie. Going back to the South African energy crisis, and then Eskom specifically. Ideally, Eskom needs to be privatized, but we know this is not going to happen. So within that context, and you obviously said that given their current debt levels, they cannot serve that debt. So given that context, wouldn't one of the first steps be to cut out the middleman, i.e. the municipalities, and allow the ordinary people to pay Eskom directly for their electricity? I know this is a simplistic solution and it's much more complex, but it's just one idea that I had. So I would like to know your ideas on that. We know privatization is not going to happen. We know they are skittish about alternative energy sources and stuff like that. So once again, within that context, what do you think? How can we ease the burden of our electricity, our electricity cuts and stuff like that? Thank you.
Okay, Karen, I'm not going to spend, if it's okay with you, too much time on Eskom. Just a few quick comments about Eskom. In fact, I don't believe Eskom can be privatized. I think it's too late, because there's nothing left to privatize. The thing has been run to the ground, and nobody would want to buy any of that stuff. The way to address Eskom, I believe, is to liberalize the generation part and allow the private sector to generate as much power as they want. And the problem on the generation side is simply red tape. That's the problem. You have to liberalize that. You have to allow the private sector to generate their own electricity. And I know a couple of clever guys that are engineers and so on, and they tell me you can literally build a new power generation unit in less than 2 years. Apparently it can be done. So liberalize that and get the generation part up and running, but allow the private sector to do it as freely. On the power stations of Eskom themselves, I'm afraid they are so run down that the only thing you can do is just to close them, most of them anyway. So you can't really sell that unless you want to sell that for scrap. So, but yes, I agree with you. See if you can sell something, but I'm afraid there's not much to sell. On the transmission part, I believe the transmission part is a natural monopoly, and I understand that remains in the hands of the state. I would concession it out perhaps, but that's a natural monopoly, and I think I will leave that to the state in the hands of the state or a state-owned enterprise, but under some concession of the private sector. And then the third part is the distribution part, and the distribution part, I believe, that is where you can really get the private sector to participate. The big problem is on the distribution part, that is where the local authorities make their money, and they are simply not going to allow that. And there's a lot of money to be made there. So there's a bit of a problem there in that the local authorities are going to kick up a huge fuss in preventing that from happening. But that is also where the opportunity is, because the local authorities are so dysfunctional that eventually they will be forced to do the right thing simply because the local authorities won't be able to do that. And I think there will eventually spontaneously private sector companies will be formed that buy from Eskom and distribute on a distribution level as well. And in fact, me personally, I buy power from Eskom directly because of reasons like this, because our local authority completely collapsed. So I think that is something that's going to happen, not because they want to, but simply because of the way that they have mismanaged just about everything they've touched the last couple of years, and there's nothing else to fall back upon except for the private sector, which will spontaneously start taking over some of these things. But the first important step is simply to sign a piece of paper telling the private sector you are allowed to start building power stations, whether that's renewables, whether it's nuclear, whether it's coal. I don't really care. So I don't want to go into the pollution debate and all that, but I don't really care. But just allow the private sector to do their thing, and you will be amazed. Within 2 years, we won't have a shortage of electricity.
Yeah, no, that's very spot on, Dawie. Alex, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yes. Hi, Dawie. I wanted to ask if I can already ask a crypto-related question.
Are we going to first jump into what's money before we get into crypto?
Yeah, no problem. I can wait.
All right, so I'll leave your hand up, and then Dawie, I think we can jump into money.
Okay.
Okay, let's get into money. Let's talk about money, and I must tell you, this is a topic that I absolutely love, and I really love money. I think it's the most amazing invention ever. There are 3 amazing inventions, I believe. The first one is the discovery or the invention of private property rights, and I'll tell you why I say so. The second most amazing invention of all time is the invention of money, and the third most amazing invention of all times is the invention of alcohol. So those 3 things, I believe, are the most important inventions ever. Now let's start with the invention of private property rights, because this thing that we call the economy is just not possible without this thing that we call private property rights. Remember, there's a saying in economics that goes that there is no free lunch. There's one exception, and that exception is that the only free lunch out there is trade. Now, just for a moment, because this is seriously important what I've just said, think about that. The only free lunch out there is trade. And that means I can take something and I exchange it with something else, with somebody else, for another item, and I gain from this transaction, and the other person gain from the transaction, because otherwise the transaction would not have happened. So trade is a free lunch. You create value out of nothing by simply exchanging stuff between 2 individuals. You're creating, this is a free lunch. But this is only possible, a free lunch, this free lunch called trade, is only possible if there's one underlying thing present, and it's actually a value set, and this value set is private property rights. You cannot trade if you don't own something. And once I own something, I can trade, and once I trade, I create value out of that. So that's important to understand. Now, in the past, what we would do, we will take something, and I've got some stuff here. So I will take something, this is a little computer that I have. So I will take this little thing and I want to exchange it for somebody else. Say this is a cow, and I want to exchange, and I actually want chickens. So I can take my cow and I can exchange it for 10 sheep, and I can exchange 1 sheep for 10 chickens. But now I have 9 sheep I don't want, and 9 chickens I don't want. So that's the dilemma, that you can trade between individuals, but there's a lot of friction in this whole thing, this trade process of trade, because the thing that I want in return for the thing I'm prepared to give does not necessarily match up so that the transaction can take place. So that's the dilemma. So everything is in place for a modern economy, namely private property rights and the desire to trade. The problem is, it's not always that practical. So how did we fix that? Well, we fixed that as good as we possibly can by barter trade, but gradually over time, something became sort of the accepted medium of exchange. And you all know the history of money, where money comes from. I'm not going to go through all of that, but there are various different kinds of money that was established over time. And eventually, one of the important kinds of money that we decided upon was gold. So, and there are many benefits to this. If we decide on a medium of exchange, and it doesn't matter what it is, it really doesn't matter what it is, as long as it is generally accepted. Another important point, The definition of money is anything that is generally accepted as money. Once it becomes generally accepted, then it becomes money, and it doesn't matter what it is, as long as people generally accept that as money. But we decided in the past mostly on gold, and gold became sort of the, I think, the standard of money for many, many, many years. And there are many benefits if you can get money. For example, you can exchange your cow for a piece of gold, and you can take a small piece of gold and buy a chicken, and you don't have the 9 sheep that you don't want and the 9 chickens that you don't want. So money, one of the things about money is that you can use money to postpone consumption. And this is another important point. You can use money to postpone consumption. And by the way, savings is the postponement of consumption. Let that sink in for a moment. And that, by the way, is one of the most important ingredients to get an economy to grow. You have to postpone consumption so that you can create capital, because investments are always equals to saving. And you can only grow a modern economy if you expand your capital base. The mere fact that we invented money allowed us to postpone consumption, savings, which allowed us to accumulate capital, which allowed for even stronger economic growth. All right, so what happened? How did money evolve over time? Gradually over time, money evolved with the economy. Initially, we had things like shells or cattle or whatever, silver, gold eventually, that we used for money. And gradually that morphed into other forms of money. And one of the first things that happened in the case of gold, for example, is that goldsmiths will keep your gold, will look after your gold on your behalf, and they will give you an IOU, a little piece of paper that you can bring back to them in exchange for your gold whenever you want to. And this piece of paper became gold, or rather became money. And that's really, that's the origin of notes that we have today. Unfortunately, what happened, and we know people, is that the goldsmiths started issuing more IOUs than what they had in the form of gold. And there was a run on the goldsmiths. They did not have enough gold. And there was this huge collapse of the financial system when we all realized there isn't enough gold going around or at the goldsmiths in order to cover all these IOUs that they have been issuing. And that was more or less also the time when politicians start getting involved in this business called money. In fact, politicians have been getting involved in this business called money long before that. One of the ways for the crown to get money out of the system was to monopolize money. So you will make a law and say, listen, gold will not have value unless I put my stamp on it, preferably my face, my picture on a coin, and then that guarantees that this is 1 ounce of gold, for example, and you are, nobody is allowed to use any other kind of money except if this money's got my picture on it. What governments then did, or what the kings or kaisers or what they did, is that they had the sole right of issuing these coins. And what they typically would do is that they would put a little bit of silver or copper, mix it into the gold, and that surplus gold they will use as their own income for the crown, and that is called signage. What they also would do quite often, they will mint 1 ounce of gold as an example, but they will chip on the edge of the coin. They will chip off some gold, and that it's called chipping. And even some modern coins today has got this little chips on the side. So that's really, that's how kings made their money in the past. They were the sole providers of money, and they made money out of that. And today, incidentally, central banks also make money out of nothing, and they also call the process signage, the same name as what was called, and during the times of the kings. But money gradually evolved, and it became paper money. And not too long ago, and then there was another reason is that why money was put under the control of governments is that we know politicians, they like to go to war always. And the problem is with wars, it is quite expensive. So politicians or kings will go to the banks and ask them to fund their war efforts, and the banks, being risk averse, quite often do not want to fund war efforts. And then politicians decided, listen, if you don't want to fund my war effort, I am going to take your license away and not allow you to make money anymore, because money was basically a private sector good in the past, and they would give the right to make money to one central bank or to one bank only, provided this bank was prepared to fund the war effort. And that's where central banks originally came from. The oldest central bank in the world is the Riksbank, the Swedish Riksbank. The second oldest one is the Bank of England, and a couple of other ones. But most central banks are relatively new inventions. The majority of them are less than 100 years old. Before that, we had money basically under control of the private sector. In the recent years, money evolved, took another step in the evolution of money, and money became information. It became digital in a form it became on computers, and central banks today will issue money, but they do not print money, or not that much anymore. They would simply create credits out of thin air. Remember, before 1973, we had a so-called gold standard, and central banks were also limited by how much money they can issue, by how much gold they had in reserve. And by 1973, it was Richard Nixon that stepped up the gold standard, and before that we had a fixed exchange rate regime internationally. And after Richard Nixon stepped up the gold standard, currencies internationally were not gold-backed anymore, but that also led to currencies becoming much more volatile, and the price or the exchange rate between currencies was not fixed anymore. And this is where we are today in modern money. And today, central banks create money out of nothing. Let me just explain the creation of money as it works today. Today, central banks, what they will do, they will create money out of nothing, quite literally, and they will either print money, notes and coins, and give it to banks in exchange for another financial instrument called a collateral, typically a government debt instrument, or they will credit the account of a bank at the central bank. So there simply is a credit. It's created out of nothing, and it doesn't cost the central bank anything to create money. They just make money. That money is called high-powered money or base money. Now, this is important to understand how this works, because it's important in the current environment. So central banks can make money out of nothing, and they can give this money to banks, and that money is called high-powered money. From there on, money is the amount of the pool of money is increased via the credit process. And let me explain to you how it works. So a central bank will print $100 worth of money, give it to a bank. The bank will lend it out to somebody else. That other person will spend it in the economy, and somebody else will come and deposit it again at the same bank. And that bank will receive the same $100 again in the form of a deposit from one of its clients, and they will lend it out again, it will be spent, and it will redeposit it back in the banking system. So that 100 Rand will be deposited and lent out numerous times. And that is the money creation process. So initially, the Reserve Bank, your central bank, will put in money into the system, but it's the credit process, the process where banks lend out money and people borrow money, that create a second wave of money via the credit process, increasing the total pool of money out there. Now, the reason why I say this is important, because in the current environment, central banks are creating huge amounts of money out of nothing, and they give it all sort of names, but essentially they're printing money and they're giving this money to the banks. But why don't we see inflation? And the reason why we don't see inflation, because people are just scared. People do not want to borrow money, and banks do not want to lend money. Now, that is a dilemma for banks, because banks, it's like pulling on a string and pushing on a string. If we borrow too much money and we create too much money in the process, central banks can always prevent us from borrowing too much money by making the price of money higher, by increasing interest rates, as an example. And when they increase interest rates, eventually it will become so expensive to borrow money that people will stop borrowing money. So it's always a guarantee. A central bank can eventually stop people from borrowing money, but making money just too expensive. And eventually we will stop doing that. The problem is the opposite is not possible. If you want people to borrow money, you can cut interest rates, but there's a problem. You can cut interest rates to zero, and you can do it below zero, but let's say zero. You cut interest rates to zero, and if people still don't want to borrow at zero, you can't force them to borrow. And that's exactly what is happening today. Central banks are creating money, putting money giving money to the banks, but the banks don't want to lend out, and people don't want to borrow money. And that essentially means it leads to a shortage of liquidity in the financial markets, and that's what central banks are trying to address at the moment. Trying to link all of this up to cryptos. So what is money actually doing? Money actually, we all know what the functions of money are, but money essentially makes it possible for people to trade between two individuals. But money also carries something else, and that is very important information. If I exchange something that I have, for example, for a piece of money, and I get a piece of money from something else, a lot of things happen. First of all, what this transaction means is that my ownership of this thing that I've sold moves over from me to the other person. So the information in this tells me that money or the ownership from this item moves from me to somebody else. At the same time, the ownership of money moves from that other individual to me. And because I am in possession of this, that is enough proof that the transaction has taken place. With modern money, like for example, digital money or that central banks are issuing nowadays, the same sort of things is happening, but we have a centralized organization called the central bank and a financial system that verifies this transaction. So for example, I will pay you something by doing an internet transfer from my bank account to your bank account, and it is impossible for an individual to transfer from one bank to the other one without going through a financial intermediary. I will tell my bank, who tells the central bank, who tells your bank to put money into your bank account. So there's always other financial intermediaries in between to verify this flow of information. And that is where the important link to so-called crypto or private money comes in. Because in the past, what would have happened, we would have used private money, a note, for example, and exchange it between two individuals. And even relatively modern times, you can use government-issued money, like, for example, a 10 Rand note or a $10 note, and you use that to exchange for something else. And the proof of the transaction was actually in the fact that I am in physical possession of the note or the goods that it was exchanged for. The problem with digital stuff, you cannot see that. And it's very difficult to follow it because you can't see that. And that's why central banking developed, because central banks and the whole financial system actually guarantees that this specific transaction happened, and they guarantee that the information behind this is actually correct. And that is why blockchain is so absolutely incredible and so amazing, because blockchain does exactly that. But instead of having one centralized organization called the central bank guaranteeing that this information is in fact true, and this information actually did flow the way it is presented, now we have a decentralized system called the blockchain that guarantees this information is actually true and that you can actually trust this information. And everybody on this blockchain verifies this information. Unlike in the past, where central banks were essentially was in the center of all of this, and they guarantee the truth of this information, the trustworthiness, so to speak, of this information. What happens now, the blockchain does exactly the same. Now, of course, all of this is a huge threat to governments because they lose control over money, which is a huge, massive revenue source for governments in all sort of levels. We talked about it earlier. And secondly, not only do they lose control over money and control over people because of that, they also lose, in their view, a very important policy instrument. Because now all of a sudden they cannot use monetary policy to achieve certain things, like what we're seeing currently. The central bank, the reserve bank, participating in the secondary market and so on and so on. What's the future going to look like? I've got a suspicion that in future, because of politicians always misbehaving, and let me make this comment, all government money and all monies that have been under the control of governments, and that means central banks, have always disappeared or is always in the process of disappearing. There is no single government-controlled money, what's called fiat money, that ever survived the test of time. Even the US dollar, and I don't have the exact numbers, let me give you the South African numbers and know that. The past 40 years, the South African rand has lost more than 99% of its value. Repeat that, more than 99% of its value. They basically destroyed the South African rand. And so governments always destroy their currencies. It's only a matter of time. They will always do that. And that's what, and of course, in the process of destroying money, you achieve something else. You pay off debt, as an example. So governments don't like it when money is in the control of individuals. And this new technology, or of the private sector, and this new technology will make it possible for the private sector to control money and to hide it with new technology. And if you can hide that, it also means that other kinds of parasitic activities of politicians will become much more difficult. For example, taxes. Because now I can trade between two individuals. The blockchain can verify this information actually happened, and that I'm now the owner of a new cryptocurrency, as an example, and I can hide my identity, making it possible for me to do business and to create wealth through this free lunch mechanism of trade, and actually hide my wealth from politicians and the taxman, and me not paying taxes the way that the politicians want me to pay. Of course, you can't hide all kinds of wealth. Certain kinds of wealth, like, for example, fixed property cannot be hidden, and you can't hide your motor car and stuff like that. But I can hide my financial transactions or my financial wealth, and cryptocurrencies is a good example of that. Now, I've got some other things that we are involved with and experimenting with, and so in terms of cryptocurrencies. And I've got a suspicion, especially with the crises that we're currently experiencing internationally, especially in countries like South Africa. We have a first world component in South Africa. We have very, very clever people in South Africa, and we have a government that is essentially collapsing. I think this is one of those really exciting and amazing opportunities where private money can be established, and where the private sector can actually take over, where politicians once again messed up. But unfortunately, in inverted commas for us, we have a central bank that's been doing a fairly good job up to now. But eventually, the central bank will be undermined, like we've seen recently coming from our political leaders. So eventually, they will take over the South African central bank as well, and eventually we will take we will follow the same route as all other countries, and we will suffer hyperinflation as well. So yes, I believe that there's a future for cryptocurrency. I think that Africa is one of those places best positioned to capitalize on this new amazing technology.
Awesome, thank you, Dawie. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Any questions out there from somebody? Alex, I think now you can ask your question.
Okay, great. Yeah, hi, Dawie again. I would like to know your point of view. What do you think? How big crypto is correlated to the S&P 500? And do you see in the near future decoupling from that? And at what moment you would see a decoupling?
Okay, the question is that cryptocurrencies relative to the S&P 500? What relative? You mean that the capitalization, the total value of crypto relative to the S&P? Is that the question?
Yeah, because right now, when you look at the price action of the S&P 500 and, for example, on Bitcoin, you see that they are heavily correlated.
Yes, I don't know. I can't answer you. I don't know what it is. My interest really is, and you can ask me. I could see on this forum there are many people that are far more clever than me in terms of cryptocurrencies. They can answer that with all that sort of ratios. I don't know really what those kind of ratios are. your second question on when is this, when are we going to go into cryptos in a big way? I think the obvious answer is to that is when we lose confidence in fiat money, which will happen, I promise you, sometime. That's one possible trigger, and that will happen when we've got high levels of inflation, and that's probably going to happen sometime not too long ago from now because of all this base money creation that has taken place. So that's one potential trigger. Another potential trigger is probably politics. In the case of South Africa, and I call it politics because essentially this is what it is. Politicians in the case of South Africa, they will realize that they promised the masses far more than what they can actually deliver, and they will try to steal more money from taxpayers, and taxpayers are going to say, listen, enough is enough. I'm going to start moving into something else where you can't steal my property. So that can be another potential trigger that can get people to start moving into this new kind of money in a big way.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you.
I think 80% of the people on this call has already lost the faith in fiat, and that's why they are on these calls, because we are all in crypto, and many of the businesses that we're involved is already accepting crypto as payment. Byron, I see you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just got a quick question for Dawie. So my question is, I always see a factor of control happening. So gold, the same thing, control, and I see Bitcoin. There is a point where the cryptocurrency needs to leave to form part of the society, right? So that control is going to exist. At the moment in exchanges, the control is starting to be pushed hardly on that area. So my question to you is, isn't it just going to become another fiat at the end of the day, because the government needs to control this currency, you know? So at the end of the day, we're going to sit with a very similar situation.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think there are a number of potential answers to that. I don't really know what the answer is to that. I don't really think so. And I think because the people on this forum, for example, participating in this discussion are people that believe in the real merits of real cryptos. So I don't think we will allow that. I think we will understand what is going on. But just adding on to that, you know, central banks, and some of them are experimenting with this, central bank can issue their own crypto. And in fact, I think it's wrong to talk about the cryptocurrency. I think we should rather from now on start talking about private currency or private money, because that essentially is the difference. Because if I look at my bank account, getting into my bank account is also a process of encryption. So that's also, in a way, crypto money. So I don't like the word crypto money, and I don't like, it's all, they're all digital, and they're all in fact encrypted in a way. The only difference is that the one is under control of a central authority, and the other is under control of a block network. So I think that's the only difference. But yes, I guess it is certainly possible for crypto money to become like fiat money. But the nice thing about crypto money or private money is that because of the nature of the technology, you can always move from the one to the other one. And I think that's the big difference. You can, and that's exactly what, what's his name? I'll get to his name now. This great, Milton Friedman, yes. What he said he's written a book on the denationalization of money. He said he foresees a future where we have a number of private currencies that will compete with one another. And people will simply move from the one private currency to the other one on their judgment on which one of those private currencies are the best managed, I guess. And I think that's the answer to that, is that the market mechanism will assure that the fittest will survive, so to speak. And it happens in a way today already. I mean, people go into the Swiss franc because we trust the Swiss franc. We trust the Swiss much more than we trust the Zimbabwean government. So you don't need a government. I mean, you need a blockchain, you need a community, certainly. But some communities will be more trusted than other communities, and I think the market will simply assure that the better managed currencies will maintain its value more than the less well managed currencies.
No, I think you're spot on there, Dawie. One thing, or the one advantage with crypto is it is limited. It can't be just, I think in my personal opinion, the world economy or fiat system is beyond repair, and that's why private money, like you would call it, is now there. So it is protected, and like you say, it depends on the value added, like Bitcoin, Ethereum. What value are those systems adding, or those coins adding? And that is what's going to determine the value of it and who's going to exchange in which currency. That's why many cryptos comes up and just disappears silently, because they add no value and there's no function behind them. All right, Gert,
can I add something, Dawie?
Go for it, please.
Yeah, let me just add something on the comment you just made. Let's just understand something here. The modern money or government money is created by a central bank printing a $100 note and give it to a bank, and from there on the credit process creates more money. That's essentially what it is. So credit, the money that you go and borrow from the bank, is nothing but a derivative of the original money that was created by the central bank. Understand this? It's a derivative. It's derived from money that was created out of nothing anyway, but it's still a derivative. It is possible to create private money in a crypto form or in a digital form, it doesn't matter, and also create derivatives that is based on that. So money creation is also possible with private money.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But of course, it depending on how you construct the whole thing. But if we allow it completely to market forces, then interest rates will become market determined completely, and that will give you completely different dynamics than what we have currently. But just keep in mind, don't think that money creation is not possible in private money. It certainly is.
That's very interesting. No, thanks. Yeah, need to think about that one. Gert, you've got your hand raised.
Yes, Dawie, thank you. Good afternoon, Dawie. My question relates to what this discussion is going on at the moment, but just a little bit different. In some way, the fiat currency at the present moment forms a base of measuring whatever your crypto value is. So if Bitcoin goes up, if Bitcoin goes down, it's always measured in terms of your dollar value. And people are in cryptos, my understanding is because eventually you want to cash out in dollars, and your dollar then is whatever the value is. So you are trading with dollar versus your Bitcoin. And so my question relates to this scenario or this thinking of mine, that is there ever going to be a time where, say for instance, fiat can disappear and we just do cryptos, we do this private money and not any more government monies? Would that be a possibility? Or will we always have fiat in the background being the measurement, because governments create their money and then the process of money creation and whatever you call just continues?
Yeah, I think the question you're asking is it really true? Will private money one day take over from so-called fiat money? And let me try to answer it by looking at another example. And that is another question. And this question is, will the dollar remain the world's dominant currency or not? And the answer to that is that the dollar will remain the world's most dominant currency for a very long time. And part of the reason for that has to do with the fact that the whole financial system of the world is built around the US dollar. Let me give you one example. If we export platinum out of South Africa, we are paid in dollars, and the dollars end up with the South African Reserve Bank. And the Reserve Bank doesn't take these dollars and put it under Lesetja Kanyahu's bed. They take these dollars and they invest it typically in the United States capital market, typically in their bond market. So what we have, and that's the deepest market in the world, that's the biggest market in the world. So what we have, we're trading in American dollars, and we use that as the preferred currency worldwide, because once you've got the dollars, you can do something with it. There's a capital market behind that. And for that reason, the dollar will remain the dominant fiat currency in the world for a long time, until another currency has also built up a significant capital market. So it's not only a matter of a dominant currency, and that's it. It's the system that is created around the dollar, and which include things like, for example, the capital market. Now that's part of the reason why it's going to be difficult for cryptocurrencies to topple the dollar. Because it's not the dollar, it's everything that goes with the dollar that makes the dollar such a strong currency. But eventually, even that will come to an end. And eventually they will experience inflation in the US as well. And eventually people will start preferring some other forms of money. And eventually other kind of instruments will be developed as well. And we will start moving into other kinds of instruments to support cryptocurrencies. But it's going to be a long time. Let me give you an example of what we are thinking of doing. And in fact, we've done it to an extent. We have listed a financial instrument on the JSE, the stock exchange in South Africa, and we're planning to issue a so-called stable coin against that. And then you give me your money, and I'll give you a coin, and I take your money and I invest it on this instrument on the JSE. And now you've got a coin on a blockchain, you can trade with that, and you can do whatever you want to. And one day, if you want to, you can bring me back the coin, and we'll sell your underlying asset on the JSE, and I will give you your money back. That's the sort of the theory behind that. So already what we've just created, we have created a kind of a capital market, well, at least in this thought experiment, I've created a kind of a, let's call it a backstop, where you can park your cryptocurrencies in the meantime until you want to use it or whatever. Now that's a kind of example, that's a kind of actions that we need in a really big scale before cryptocurrencies will be in a position where they can really topple the big currencies like the US dollar. We're certainly not there yet. But it's like all technologies, all new technologies.
Sorry, Dawie, you muted.
My apologies.
Yeah.
I just can you hear me? Are you?
Yeah, there you're back. You're back.
Okay. Okay. All new technologies always take longer to be implemented than what we think. And when new technologies actually are implemented, the process is much quicker than what we think. So I think this is going to be the same with private money. It's taken a long time. We all expected it's going to take over the world. It did not. And then one day it's going to take over the world. The same with electric cars. We all thought it's going to take over it did not. But one day we're going to wake up and it will only be electric cars. The same with crypto, I believe. But there's some of the reason why it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy to topple the dollar.
Because in that discussion, that thought process that you just had now of the stable coin, the central bank is already pushing against that. There's a white paper, I think it's the central bank, but there is already a white paper in existence with some specifics, how the stable coin should be managed, etc. With one possibility of the 6 that they have, the last one would be not to accept that by banks. So because of the way of controlling that stable coin, once it becomes a similar type of scenario as a fiat like a dollar, they have to, Christine Lagarde, which mentioned that it's the like market you enter in has the similar rules for everybody, and that has to apply to whichever enters into that market. So if a stable coin enters into the fiat environment, there are rules and regulations they have to apply to. And that will be the issue about the controlling. That issue is about control. So there's pushback on that, exactly that thought thing that you now said.
Yeah. Can I maybe comment on that in from a slightly different angle? And that is that the reason why we like to use fiat money is because there's a big brother behind it. So if you steal my money, or if I steal your money, or something happens, then I can go somewhere and I can complain, and I've got the authorities to help me. The authorities in inverted commas, I don't like this word, but I've got the authorities. I can get help from somebody with big brother somewhere. And that's part of the reason why I believe South Africa is the ideal place for this private money to take hold. Because this big brother is falling apart. Government is falling apart in South Africa, and you can't. And we're replacing government at all sort of levels. There are many examples. I mean, my kids are going to a private school. Private schools, when I was going to school, they didn't exist basically. Well, I don't know of any. And we've got more security guards today than police. And that's what's going to happen. We are going to organize ourselves in groups, and those groups exist already. And if somebody, if I believe I was mistreated by somebody, I'm going to go to this group to enforce certain laws and not to the state anymore. And I think there's a role to be played for the private currencies eventually. Yes, at the moment, there is certainly pushback because they can, because they're still strong enough. But the state in South Africa is collapsing, and we need alternative forms of, again, I don't like the word, but of authority or structures to enforce certain rules. And like Takealot is a good example of that, because you can rate the guy. Do I like this guy or not? And that actually will determine his success over time, whether I like the way he's treating me or not, and vice versa. And I guess that's the future can look like that as well. And in an environment like that, without a doubt, there is ample space for private currencies as well to be used.
No, I agree 100% with you, Dawie. That's again spot on, and that's why more and more business platforms and coins coming up. And South Africa, and I've heard it from numerous places now, is the hotspot for crypto, like you say, private money. But the one thing that is missing is adoption. I think we've got early adoption going on, and the more the public gets into crypto and educated, you mentioned that earlier as well in the previous call, education is going to be crucial for people to understand this. And then once mass adoption takes place, this is when replacement will happen.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Dawie at this point? Dawie, I know you said 1:15. We're well past that.
I saw a question popping up. Somebody asking me where to invest. Can I answer that one?
Oh, go for it, Joe. I can't see.
Okay. The question is where to invest, and I think.
I see. Yeah.
I think the answer to that is depending on who you are, because I think there are really amazing opportunities. We are asset managers, and we can see many really wonderful, cheap assets to invest out there. But the general comment is that just the normal stuff, depending who you are, because your risk profile may be different from somebody else's. But make sure, like I said, South Africa is in deep trouble, and I can guarantee you things are going to get really rough in South Africa. So I advise people to make sure that you take a substantial portion of your investment abroad. And I always like equities. Equities is the place to be. But again, it really depends on you individually, depending who you are, depending how much money you have, that sort of stuff.
All right, thanks. Louis, I see you've got your hands raised or hand raised. Louis, can you hear? Okay, Louis, you can praat. Ja, ek het jou ge-unmute.
Hello, Dawie.
Yes, hello, Louis.
Yeah, how are you doing?
No, I'm better than a country, thank you.
Thanks for all this advice and everything today. Dawie, just a quick one on this. If you can advise on this, the current situation, Corona, is it going to be positive or negative for crypto? Can advise on this? Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know if it's going to be positive or negative. Let's think through this. The industries that is going to benefit, or at least suffer less from this Corona thing than other industries will be the service industry, but not any kind of service industry, but generally the service industry, and generally the service industry that can be related to the digital economy. A good example is Google and Microsoft and YouTube and Facebook and that sort of stuff. But that's nothing new. We know this. The service industry that cannot be digitized, like, for example, restaurants, waiters, hair salons, that sort of stuff, they are going to be decimated. So the industries that will benefit, and this is a trend that has been going on long before the virus. The virus is simply in making the fourth industrial revolution happening faster. So the guys that are going to benefit will be those kind of industries that I've mentioned, and typically it will be banking, and it will be asset management, it will be news people, it will be all those industries that the tech industries typically. And that also means that cryptocurrency will probably benefit from this as well. So I think, if anything, private currency will get a boost from this. At the moment, private currency is not on the headlines, and the reason simply is because people are busy doing other stuff at the moment. It's survival stuff at the moment, but don't you worry, it's going to come back. And I think this crisis will make it will actually accelerate the implementation or the acceptance of private money.
Thank you for that, Dawie.
Now, there you have it. That is exactly what this community is all about. Any other questions? Dawie, thank you very much for that. Is there any other questions? How's your time, Dawie? Do you need to go, or there's questions?
I've got until half, so there's another 4
Okay,
minutes.
fantastic.
I was late.
Gold and silver, is that a good place to invest?
I saw that. The short answer is I don't really like that. You buy. I don't like gold, and let me tell you why. There can be reasons why you want to buy gold. You want to buy gold if you believe that there's going to be massive dollar inflation, or you want to buy gold if you want to put the gold in your pocket and run. You want to buy gold if there's some sort of sentimental reason for buying gold, and you want to buy gold if you want to seduce women. Those are the reasons why you want to buy gold. You do not want to buy gold because it's expensive to look after. You do not want to buy gold because it doesn't increase doesn't get more. It's just the same bar of gold that you have. It's not going to get more. And there's all sort of costs and things involved in gold. So I don't like gold for those reasons. But if there's no alternative and normal fiat money disappears or comes under a lot of pressure, then it makes sense to buy gold. But I'm not the gold bull. I think what we have today is a new kind of gold, and it's a digital form of gold, and it's probably going to be this private money, or at least some sort of private money, that will also keep its value, and it will keep its value because of the community that maintains that, and that, in my view, is more valuable. Gold is only valuable because it's got the history behind it. That is really so. I'm not a gold fan, not a big yeah. I don't like gold.
Thanks for that, Dawie. Byron, I see you've lowered your hand. Did you have a question, Byron?
Yes, I did write it in the comments, but I just wanted to know why, Dawie, is the New York Stock Exchange looking so good, yet the unemployment in the USA is I think they said something about 16 million. It's weird.
Yeah, no, that's very easy to Byron, no, it's not weird at all. That's very easy to understand. I mean, if you force feed the market with cash, the money must go somewhere. So actually what we are seeing today is nothing but inflation, but it's asset inflation. It's not consumer inflation, it is asset inflation. So the authorities, they are just pumping the balloon full of money. That's all. That's all that's happening. Nothing to do with fundamentals, nothing to do with economic growth or the recession or unemployment. It is just pumping the thing full of money. Trillions and trillions of dollars.
Thanks.
All right, Dawie, thank you very much. It doesn't look like we've got more questions, but if there is one sentence or one word of advice for private money, whichever format it would be, what would that be? Yes, go private money, educate yourself, or no, give it some time.
Is that your question?
That's my question. Very broad.
My answer to this is that the important thing here is not private money. It is important to understand where it comes from, the history, and to understand how everything comes together. The important part here is not private money. The important part here is the technology. That's the important part. The technology is going to change our lives. Now, I'm not very clever with these sort of things. I mean, I really battle. I have to ask my good friends. Skulk Dommel still needs to come and help me to get my crypto coins that I can't get out somewhere about, I don't know. So I'm not very clever with this. And the reason why I'm not clever is because I haven't been playing around with the technology enough. And that's my advice to people. Buy this stuff. Don't put your milk money in it. But buy this stuff, 100 Rand to 200 Rand or whatever you want to, and get familiar with the technology. And even if you lose your money, it doesn't matter, because you're going to gain knowledge. And it will be some of the best money you've spent ever. Find out about this technology. This is what it is about. It's not investment, it's technology. And understand how this technology, and get familiar with the technology, and stop being scared of the technology. I think that's the answer.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. Thank you very much. Yeah, that is why we are into crypto, or private money, as Dawie has now recoined it for us, or for me in essence. And I do think it's the mass adoption that's required with education. It is like Dawie just said now, and what we've been saying for a long time: stay in control, but educate yourself on it. And we are going to try and push that through into the business world with various platforms like CommunityBusinessToken and Digital Flyer and those kind of things. It is being more adopted. I mean, I'm speaking daily to businesses, asking how can they implement crypto and being paid in it. But next week, hopefully, we will have somebody online talking about SaaS and crypto.